All right, folks, I believe, according to no clock on the wall, but the clock on my computer, it is six o'clock. It is Tuesday, June 27th, and we're in the council chambers of the city of Platteville, and I call our meeting, our regularly scheduled meeting to order. Candace will start with roll call.
Kathy Kopp. Here. Jason Arts.
Here.
Lynn Parrott is excused. Todd Casper.
Here.
Ken Killian.
Here.
Barbara Doss.
Here. And the first thing on our agenda tonight is a exciting, enthusiastic, vigorous presentation of our 2022 financial statements and audit report. Brent.
Good evening, everyone. Appreciate that introduction. I'll keep it exciting. I'll keep it moving along. Save questions or feel free to ask questions at the end, but I'll keep it brief, try to keep it pretty high level. I did the electronic version, I believe, of the audit report. Hopefully went out or will be going out, but I did pass out hard copies of the audit report tonight and required audit communications, which is a thorough, lengthy document, 80 plus pages. So I don't plan on going over that in any detail. I'm going to keep it pretty high level tonight. So my name, Brent Nelson, audit partner with Johnson Block and Company. I work out of our Mineral Point office. And like I said, I'll concentrate on the PowerPoint. I'm here reporting on the year ended December 31st, 2022. So just a quick overview. So we have completed our audit of the financial statement. So our completed report is in that bound hard copy document. We issued unmodified opinions on the financial statements, which is a good thing, basically better known as a clean opinion. We believe those financial statements in the bound report are in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles in all material respects. The scope of our audit included all city funds, utility, TIF districts, housing authority. You know, the city has a lot of different funds, 15 funds. That was all captured within the scope of our audit. Prior to going final with the audit, management reviewed and approved a draft report. So management saw that final report before we submitted it. We also, on behalf of the city, we prepare a couple regulatory reports. The water utility is regulated by the PSC, and there's an annual submission that we help the utility submit. In addition, there's this municipal financial report that gets submitted, a Form C document that goes to the Department of Revenue. So a couple of regulatory reports we help with. In addition to the financial statement audit that I'm going over tonight, we also are required to do a single audit, which is an additional compliance audit. Last couple of years, the city's been over the $750,000 federal dollar threshold. Prior to the last couple of years, the city had been below that, but with all of this ARPA, the COVID funding, CDBG funding, the city's been well over that threshold. So that's another audit that we've started, but we haven't completed that. So that'll be a summer fall project that's due by the end of September. So there'll be another report coming from us here, probably early fall. So just some 2022 financial highlights. So the governmental funds, so general fund, capital projects fund, TIF districts, overall, looking across all funds, the overall change was a decrease in fund balance of $417,000. So at the fund level, some notable fund level changes. So the general fund decreased $19,180. So relatively flat in the big picture. Capital projects fund decreased was the core of that decrease. The capital projects fund decreased approximately 364,000. And there were some projects scheduled to happen in 2021 that had to get delayed into 2022. So, a lot of times with capital project funds, we'll see those fluctuations. So that nothing too surprising there. The airport fund increased $89,000. TIF district number 6, that's one of is there 3 TIF districts right now? That one had a notable decrease in 2022 of $173,000. I know that was a heavy debt service year for TIF district number 6, which would explain that decrease in fund balance. Overall, general fund, comparing actual results to the budget, reported favorable results. So revenues were coming in higher than budget and expenditures were lower in budget. So overall, general fund budget to actual was good. And then on the utility side of things, so the water and sewer utility had an increase in net position of $1.3 million. So I'll touch on that a little bit later. General fund balance, I want to, that tends to get the most attention. So I was going to concentrate on that, but this PowerPoint shows a 5-year trend and how the general fund balance has changed over the last 5 years. So the far right column is December 31st, 2022. And overall, the general fund balance has been steady and stable. I think as if there ever is excess funds in the general fund balance, those commonly get moved over to the capital projects fund. So overall, general fund balance has been stable. There's different classifications of fund balance: non-spendable, restricted. The restricted would be external restrictions, whereas assigned, another classification, is internal restrictions. And then the unassigned gets the most attention. What is more discretionary in nature? There's no strings attached to those funds. So as of December 31st, 2022, unassigned fund balance of the general fund was a little bit over $3 million. Which ties into my next slide. So the city has a fund balance policy where they want their unassigned fund balance to ideally be. So the city's fund balance policy is to maintain a minimum unassigned general fund reserve of not less than 20% of annual expenditures. So just comparing that to that policy, the actual result. So that 20% in the graph, 20% is the bottom line of that graph. And the city's unassigned fund balance is consistently above that. Typically, it's been around 30 to 40%. Unassigned fund balance represents about 30 to 40% of annual expenditures. So the city's been in compliance with the policy it's set for itself. And the 20% is a very common policy I see for municipalities. Just a quick look at general fund revenues, a 3-year comparative trend in that graph. The most general fund revenues comes from intergovernmental sources. So that'd be state funding, federal funding. The biggest chunk of that being state shared revenues, which state shared revenues have been really flat here the last couple of years, but that's, I'm sure a lot of people have seen the articles that's going to change. So, but overall, 2020 to 2022, and I think, I'm not sure when that state funding will change, but overall, the intergovernmental funding has been pretty flat in the general fund. There was some CARES Act funding in 2020. You'll notice intergovernmental revenue was pretty high in 2020. There was some COVID relief funds immediately in 2020. But overall, intergovernmental funding made up 45% of general fund revenue, followed by taxes of about 39% of revenue. So just between those two sources is 85% of the general fund's revenue. That taxes there, so that's the core of that is property taxes, but also in there is room taxes, things, and that's room taxes have really gone up here since 2020 now, as we move farther away from the pandemic. Quick look at expenditures as well, 3-year trend. 36% of general fund expenditures are within the function public safety, which public safety, the main things that covers is police services, fire department, building inspection. Those are the core of what's in public safety. But for the general fund, public safety represents about 36% of general fund expenditures, followed by leisure activities, pool, parks, things of that nature. And you'll see leisure activities has gone up as well here, the further we've gone away from 2020 and the beginning of the pandemic. Transfers is general fund transfers out. So this would be transfers from the general fund to other funds was 558,000 in 22, with the core of that being a general fund transfer to the capital projects fund. So annually, the city's general fund has made transfers anywhere from 300,000 up to this year. It was a little bit over 550,000 in total. So take a quick look at the utility, just to switch gears a bit. So we've talked about just governmental funds. The utilities are self-sustaining funds, completely separate from the general fund, the TIF district. So we show those as completely separate funds in the audited financials. But just some historical trends of the utility net income, revenues in the middle column, expenses, and then the net of those being net income. So you'll notice with the revenues, we're pretty flat from 2018 to 2021, and you'll see the increase in 2022 from, roughly 5 million to 5.6 million. The city or the utility did implement some rate increases that impacted the 22 numbers. So the sewer rates increased September 21. So those rates were in effect for all of calendar 2022. And then also the water utility had a rate increase approved by the PSC. So that was a rate increase of about 7.6%. So those two rate increases really drove up revenues in 2022. So net income in 2022 for the combined utility, that both water and sewer are shown as one utility for the city, was a net income of 1.3 million. And net income for the utilities doesn't mean cash flow. So there's things in the utility. So the utility made long-term debt principal payments of 1.1 million. Those aren't shown as an expense like they would be in governmental funds. They're shown as a reduction of liability. So it's a different basis of accounting just based on the financials. Water utility rate of return was a little bit over 4%, as reported in the PSC report for 2022. And a common benchmark I see the PSC set is around 5%. So shy of that, but it is trending. I think before the new rates were implemented, it was trending downward, and it was roughly about 3%, I think, for 2021. So with those new rates being in effect all of 2022, I think that'll continue to rise. Just a quick look at the long-term debt that the city has outstanding. Governmental activities, so that'd be your TIF districts, general fund. Bonds and note payable at December 31st was outstanding basically $19.5 million. The state statutes do limit how much general obligation debt a city can issue. And that state limit for 2022 was 42.6 million. So if the city ever did want to issue more general obligation debt, there is capacity to do so. And I think I don't know if that's a general obligation borrowing offhand tonight or if that's a revenue. So that would exclude any revenue bonds, but there is plenty of capacity there should the city ever need it. Business type activities would be the utility, water and sewer. Revenue debt for the utility as of the end of the year was $18.3 million. So just to wrap up, overall conclusions, like I said, city's general fund is healthy. It's been stable, well over the policy. So good to see that. There is debt capacity if you ever should need it. The water utility rate return on, basically the return on investment, return on plant is about 4%, which is slightly below probably that 5% target, but I think it'll trend upward as those rates are in effect for a full year. In addition to the audited financial statements, there's a required audit communication document that is slipped into the bound copy. Mostly that's pretty standard communications that we're required to report annually. There's some new accounting pronouncements that will impact the city's 2023 financials. So that's a little bit of language on what could change there. Appreciate all the city personnel's help throughout the audit process. Everybody's been very cooperative. It's been a good, clean process. Thanks for letting me be of service. Is there any questions?
All right, any questions for Brent? Ken?
Do you do any audit work for the housing authority?
Yes, good question. Yeah, we do. Included in that bound report, we show the housing authority as a component unit of the city. So yep, so the housing authority is basically shown as a separate fund, but that is within the scope of our audit. So we audited their financial statements.
Even though they're not part of the city?
They're their own legal entity. But since we've concluded that since they're so closely related, that they're a component unit of the city. So technically they are their own separate entity, but we do capture them in the scope of our audit.
And we pay for the audit for the housing authority, the city.
We allocate the cost for the housing authority's portion of the audit
To the
housing authority.
That's your answer?
We allocate the housing authority portion of the audit to the housing authority. So they pay for their portion of the audit.
They pay for their portion.
Correct.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, then, thank you, Brent, and we thank our staff for being cooperative, but even more than that, we thank our staff for all the diligent work that they do throughout the year to make this a process that goes smoothly.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on to the next item on our agenda, which is consideration of the consent agenda. We have the following items that might be approved on a single motion or vote due to their routine nature. If you want something for separate discussion, let me know. We have the council minutes from June 13th. We have payment of bills, appointments to boards and commissions. I sent all of you the vacancy list, but I didn't hear from any of you. I have none tonight. Licenses, we have 1 and 2 year operator licenses to sell and serve alcohol as were included in your packet. Run permits, we have the Ben's Hope Organization Run Walk scheduled for Saturday, September 16th, starting at 8 a.m. And we have the Platteville Family Resource Center breaking away from domestic violence race run on Saturday, July 15th, starting at 8 a.m. And then in terms of, we have the motion to for the Grant County Highway Construction Aids, requesting our appropriation. Do I hear a motion?
Move that we approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Ken and a second by Kathy to approve the consent agenda. Candace will vote.
Cop? Yes. Arts?
Yes.
Casper?
Yes.
Killian?
Yes,
Doss?
Yes.
Motion carries.
I have had no one give me anything relative to citizens' comments, observations, and petitions as a green sheet. We do welcome Mr. Goff to our audience tonight. He is with Pattern Energy, and I'm sure he'll be just excited by all the stuff he learns here tonight. Other than that, does somebody want to give a quick update on the upcoming activity? I think the upcoming weekend is actually the 4th of July weekend. So I know that there are all kinds of things going on, including Heritage Day at the Mining Museum on the 4th. That would be on Tuesday. I believe that time is 9 to 4. We have a program in City Park at 10 a.m. And of course, in the evening, we have the fireworks, which are, hopefully, we have no issues with fireworks, right, Brian? Okay, we've got that covered. Somebody asked me, it's pretty dry. Are we still going to have fireworks? I think we have that covered though. So just to go over those. So anybody with anything else? Okay. And let's go on to the reports in our packet. Tourism Committee, Jason, anything to add?
No, I haven't been to my first meeting yet, but I will be here
Sure.
for the next one.
Okay,
I have a little correction,
on the tourism one,
I believe.
okay,
It's for, let's see. January 19th, 2023 minutes, I think.
okay,
And this is the summary of room tax collections, and the year given here is 2021, and 2021 is given twice. So I assume that it's a typo here, that for first year it should be 2022. Is that correct?
is that in the minutes?
Summary of room tax collection, year 2021, and then it says 2021 the second time.
Yeah, that must be a
2020,
typo.
2019, 2018, and so on.
Yes, yeah, that's a typo. That should read 2022.
Okay. So who makes that correction?
Sheila, I'll pass that on to her.
Okay, I believe I brought that up last time. Thank you.
Okay, any other, besides tourism, we have the Board of Appeals zoning. Todd, anything?
Yes, again, everyone on the Board of Appeals somewhat begs that the council take a look at some of the ordinances we have that have not kept date with what's occurring today in our city. Every appeal we seem to come before is something that is almost commonsensical in the sense that it wasn't necessary. The law is outdated. We ask who and when these laws were approved and for what purpose, and no one can give us an answer because it's been 20, 30 or more years. So we're asking that the council take a look at specifically chapter 22 and anything else related. We'd like to streamline the process for people building and enjoying their property. I guess that's all I have to say.
Okay, we'll take that under advisement. I'm sure Clint has written down. Let's take a review of chapter 22. I know that the Plan Commission has reviewed several chapters. I just can't remember the ones, but we'll take a look. Okay. Historic Preservation Commission, Ken.
I have no addition.
All right. Then we'll move on to our action items. The first of which is resolution 23-19, Community Development Investment Grant Application for Armory renovations. Joe.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, the Armory was recently purchased by a group of private investors, and they're working to find some tenants to fill that building. So far, Head Start has moved over there from OE Gray. The ADRC is using the kitchen space. The city will be using the gym for rec programs. And I think they have a couple other private businesses that they're looking at putting in there. But also as part of their efforts to establish some tenants and keep the ones in there happy, they're looking at doing some building and property improvements. And so far they're looking at some heating upgrades, lighting upgrades, refinishing the gym floor, possibly some backboards, scoreboards, that type of thing, and then improvements to the parking lot. They're quickly finding out that some of those projects are very expensive. So they're looking for whatever grant assistance that they can find. And so they contacted the city, and they also contacted Ela from WEDC. And she pointed them in the direction of the Community Development Investment Grant, which is the same grant program we just recently approved the grant for the Updraft Brewery. So if you recall, that's a program that technically the city is the applicant. So we would get the funds and then do an agreement with the business owner, the property owner, to do whatever projects that were submitted as part of that grant. It's up to $250,000. It's a matching grant, so they would have to match that amount with private funds. So we did submit a preliminary application at this point, and so far it looks favorable. So if approved, we would be submitting a final grant application in July. That's the beginning of their next grant cycle. But since the city is technically the applicant, council has to approve the submittal of that grant application. So staff would recommend approval since there's no cost to the city other than just some staff time. So we would recommend approval of the grant application. And one item of addition, the Community Safe Routes Committee did review this proposal, and they have recommended that if awarded, that the council include a condition that as part of the parking lot improvements that they add some bike parking or a bike rack to that facility. Any questions?
Questions about approving this application for a CDI grant for armory renovations, and basically this is a pass through. There'll be a development agreement, and the people on the hook for paying it back if it's done wrong would be the developer. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
And it is a reimbursement, so they have to submit the invoices to me, then I approve it and submit it to the state.
Just comment, it's very nice to see a company that actually carried through with what it said it was going to do and is in the process of completing that. What a wonderful thing.
100%.
I have a motion if no one else has any other comments. A motion to approve resolution 23-19 authorizing the submission of an application for a community development investment grant to assist the armory renovations.
Okay, we have a motion by Todd and a second by Kathy to approve resolution 23-19. We'll vote.
Cop,
Yes.
Arts,
Yes.
Casper,
Yes.
Killian,
yes,
Doss,
Yes.
motion carries.
Okay, next item on our action agenda is the Compliance Maintenance Annual Report 2022. This is as it relates to the city's wastewater treatment plant. Howard.
Yes, thank you very much. As we had discussed last time, the Compliance Maintenance Annual Report is an annual report required to be submitted by June 30th. A self-report on our treatment plant, collection system, the experience of our personnel and our financial and managerial capacity. Our system is graded A in all areas. We have a stable financial condition, as was pointed out tonight. And we have our management procedures. So we require a resolution demonstrating that the Common Council has reviewed and approved the submission of this CMAR. The Water and Sewer Commission reviewed the CMAR on June 21st and recommends Common Council approval.
Okay, questions on the 2022 CMAR wastewater treatment plant annual review? I hear a motion.
I move to approve the resolution.
Okay, we have a motion by Ken and a second by Kathy to approve resolution 23-20, the Compliance Maintenance Annual Report. Candace will vote.
Cop,
Yes.
Arts,
Yes.
Casper,
Yes.
Killian,
Yes,
Doss,
Yes.
motion carries.
Okay, the next item on our agenda tonight is resolution 23-21, awarding the sale of $1.23 million general obligation corporate purpose bonds, series 2023. And I believe this will be Nicola and Brian, our dynamic financial duo.
Thank you. I think Brian's a little more dynamic than I am, but anyway, yes. So in case you did not have it on your calendar, today was the day of the first bond issue sale, not the last for this year, but the first, and that was our general obligation corporate purpose bonds for our CIP for what we call the city, as opposed to water sewer. So these were GO bonds, and in the staff note that we went through last time, you'll see that the items that were being funded from this bond were the Jefferson Street reconstruction, the 2.5-ton dump truck, the street garage roof, the end loader plow, the fire department radio repeater, and the compost site electronic access fence. And we talked about last time that this is a little bit different than prior years when we've just borrowed for street reconstruction, and that had to do with applying for grants that we did not get awarded and having to pivot in how we did our CIP budget last year, and being able to issue bonds for certain things under state statute other than just street reconstruction. So that's how that came about. And I'm going to hand over to Brian. I don't want to steal his thunder, but I just did want to let you know that we did have great news today. And our interest rate for our low bid was 3.58%. And I thought it'd be helpful for you to have some context for that, which is that last year's analogous bond issue for street reconstruction was 3.23%, so a tick lower. And as compared to 2021, which I think was 1.23%. So, so definitely higher than it was during the pandemic, but a lot lower than it might have been. And Brian's going to expand on that.
Thank you. So I did hand out packets to each of you, understand that comes today with the sale results. So, we really can't send it out any earlier, but correct, Ken, that is the packet. So if you turn to the first page, as Nicola walked through, the top section identifies the purposes, so I won't repeat what Nicola just went through. Your rating, which the report is the back half of this from S&P. They did affirm your rating, which means that you've just stayed at the same place. And that was more or less expected, given that there weren't any significant financial changes since the last time you went out for a rating. There are no significant economic changes as well since the last time you went out for a rating. So some of those highlights, so you don't feel the need to kind of page through that as we go. Just noting those similar, this is all similar conditions to previous reports. Is they note a weak economy, which they would quantify as low income, but that is typical of, you know, what they would deem a university town or college town. So that's kind of typical just because, you know, that's impacted by who lives here in those income levels. And then also that EV per capita. And I would just say, you know, obviously any strides you can do to continue to bolster economic development, that can certainly help that. And if there's kind of ways to bolster income too, it would be bringing in businesses with, you know, higher income levels that then turns into residents who live here to work at those businesses. So just wanted to make a quick comment on that. As you'll see the quote, weak economy, understand though, that's no different than any other reports you've received. They again, note your strong financial management. Part of that is due to the continued long-range planning efforts that we do through the financial management plan. So they definitely give you an uptick as a result of doing that, as well as your ongoing kind of agendas that would include financial reports as you go throughout the year, meaning you're not just reacting to Brent's presentation once a year, but kind of monitoring your finances as you go. So we would say kind of keep up the good work there. And then the other highlight that they say is weak debt, which is something that we've identified, you know, since we've been engaged with the financial management plan in 2017 and kind of shifted to say, we're going to try to only issue debt to the amount of at which we're amortizing it. So you may kind of recall that has been a strategy for the past several years. So again, you know, good news there in that it's affirmed, but there's really no changes. In terms of the sale today, you did get 5 bids. The low bidder was Baird out of Milwaukee, Wisconsin at that 3.58%. Some of the highlights that I'll hit, I'll kind of go to the pages, to the exact tables to point those out. So I'm going to skip down to the notes here. And I'll just say that we were able to downsize this debt by 20,000, and I'll show why on the next table. But just note when you're making your motion, we would recommend that you do award the sale given the positive results. But it is 1.21 million. So just kind of make note of that you wouldn't need to say the 1.23 million if you are making a motion to approve. And then your closing date will be July 19th, which is when you will receive your monies. So if you turn to the next page, it identifies the attachments, so we can skip over that. The next page identifies this bid tab. If you're kind of curious to see who bid, the one thing I'll say is it's good to have 5 bidders. We like to see at least 3, but all is to say, Platteville's in good credit standing, and therefore you're going to have a lot of continued interest. So 5 bids is good. They were all pretty much grouped together around that 3.6%, which also just shows the market's not in too much flux. So if you go a couple pages beyond that,
Page are you on?
table 1.
What's the page number?
It would be the page after page 2.
Yep, so you should have to turn your packet sideways. So table 1 as identified in the top left, this just compares one on the left, you'll kind of see that pink column or orange column there. That's the notes that would be needed for the other non-bondable projects. So that's not for consideration tonight. We're just kind of focusing on the preliminary versus final. This page, if you look all the way to the rightmost column, does identify how we got to 20,000 less of bond issuance. So they did offer a premium, which basically means they pay you for a higher coupon rate so that they have investors that are attracted. But they pay you up front for that. So you're able to downsize by 15,000. We also had lower costs of issuance than we estimate. Of course, we can really only know our costs of issuance that, you know, we would charge the city for helping you through this financing. So the rest we do estimate, but those all did come down, which is obviously good news as well. Hence 15 plus 5 to get to your $20,000 adjustment lower. If there's no questions on table one, I'll just jump to table two to hit a highlight there. Again, we are not focusing on the pink or orange section here, as those are the notes that would be needed to fund the non-bondable projects, but focusing on the blue columns. And on this page, all I want to hit is at the bottom, you'll see our preliminary estimates to difference. You'll kind of see that there's that 20,000 difference in your par amount or the total principal, which I explained on the previous page. Your interest costs basically remain the same. A lot of that was due to just the market kind of being relatively flat from the time that we projected. But when you compare and put in the premium that was offered, actually that takes care of that conservative buffer. So if you recall during the pre-sale or set sale resolution, I spoke to that we add a conservative buffer at that time. Interest rates were going up about 10 basis points or 0.1% a week. So we did add that conservative buffer. That, however, didn't come true. It kind of just remained flat at this 3.6 rate. So good news, it was a good time to issue. So that's where you get, ultimately we're 80,000 less than what we came to you with when you authorized the bonds. So that is good news, and we'll speak to the good news to taxpayers on the next page. The one thing I'll note too, it was a good week to sell. Last week, we had another sale on Thursday, and that sold at 3.8%. We had another sale on Tuesday that was like 3.7. So just one thing there that we'll kind of keep in mind and keep in contact with city staff. But sometimes trying to sell on those fourth weeks can be a benefit, only because not all communities meet on the fourth week. So I think there's something there to kind of consider. So we, that's one example. It's not always going to be the case, but just kind of one example there in terms of the importance of sale date and walking through that. The next item is table 3. This is that impact to taxpayers. The left side of this table, the blue, is all your existing debt, so that remains unchanged. We did not do any sort of refunding given where the interest rate market is and compared to, previous years and your existing debt outstanding. However, I'll lead your eyes to the middle column in the orange, which is proposed debt. The good news here is we were able to restructure the debt with that premium being offered so that you actually do not have an increase to your debt service tax levy as a result of this sale. So it's going to continue to go down. One thing that does is obviously keep your capacity to issue new debt for additional projects in the future. But as well as obviously we're making some projections on valuations, but it keeps that tax rate, flat, presuming your valuations remain stable and don't go down. So that is what we would say is probably most important, is trying to keep that tax levy for debt to continue to go down, because then you would certainly have your opportunities as it relates to operations or other cash capital spending as you go in year over year. And then the bottom right just indicates in dark orange there, the $1,000 or $1,052 is the total cost to pay for these projects as a result of the loan. So that's on a sample taxpayer of a $300,000 property. If you're kind of curious, what's the impact just to a sample taxpayer there? If you were curious on kind of that tax rate, we could provide that as well, or kind of divide that out over time or by the 300,000, excuse me, to kind of get to that. What's that change in tax rate as a result? But that said, we're able to structure this in an advantageous manner with your existing debt.
The taxpayers paying over the life of this from 2023 to 2039, 1,000.
Yep, just as a result of for paying for these projects and the financing of those projects.
Could be early payment.
Yep, you have an 8-year call, so 2031 you could prepay it. The next table is table 4. which is speaking to the debt capacity, which Brent already touched on for your existing debt. That is the left column, so I won't touch on that, just to say the impact of the new debt, which is all of the right columns or orange columns. And I've kind of divided it out by your statutory limit, which Brent spoke to, but then you keep yourselves to a policy limit of 75% of that or 3.5% of EV. So we've kind of put in what your percent limit is to your policy, which would be as a result of this, you're at 61% to your policy, and you would have 11.7 million of additional capacity until you'd hit your policy. That's not to encourage to get to that policy limit, as of course you would, start to feel some pressures, and SMP might, provide additional opinions there. But it's all to say that you do have additional capacity there as you contemplate other projects moving into the future. And beyond that is the rating report. So like I said, I kind of hit the highlights there, but if you want to know more, I can dive deeper.
Okay, so does anybody have questions of Brian? It is good news that we,
I don't have a question from Brian. I have a comment as to this entire resolution. We look at Jefferson Street, and that's the 2 blocks, and there's many streets up in my district that need help. We had some people up, shoveling gravel into the holes of the streets. There's a number of streets up there that have problems, and they're serious problems, so you can't ride a bike across them. But I look at this, we're doing 2 blocks for just over $500,000. I spoke with one of our engineers about the possibility that we need to save money in neighborhoods where we can. And we don't need, and I'm saying we make changes where if there's neighborhoods where we don't need the curb and gutter, that it not be installed. I know one lady from Perry Street came in here and spoke of her wonderful neighborhood and the fact that, her neighborhood is beautiful because they don't have curb and gutter. I spoke with the engineer about places where we don't need to have storm sewer, that perhaps we remove it. And I guess I asked it up in my district, perhaps up in these streets, that we sit down and maybe take a hard look at re-engineering and putting in what's necessary in this neighborhood versus what we just standardly do. No question in my mind that there are streets in this city that need 6 inches of concrete because of the traffic they take. But I don't believe that we need sidewalks on both sides. I don't believe that we need curb and gutter. Actually, it's unappealing in some neighborhoods. So I asked it up in this district that perhaps when we move forward in the future, that we consider looking at this district as maybe a model, and that we put in the streets we need around the schools. Obviously, we need some blacktops. They're going to take some heavy vehicle traffic. But once again, in some of these cul-de-sacs, in some of these areas, no sense in having sidewalks on both sides of the street. Perhaps in some of these neighborhoods, you don't need sidewalks at all. So it's just a comment I had on this whole issue, I guess. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Elliott, for what you do.
okay, any other questions, comments? You get closer to your microphone. There we go.
Oh, just clarify on the resolution, the dollar amount.
Be 1.21. So it's 1,210,000.
Yep.
Because we had the $20,000 in, so it's 1 point, like on the outside of the sale day report, 1,210,000 GO corporate purpose bond series 2023. Okay, if there are no other questions, Brian, thank you for your presentation. Do I hear a motion?
Make a motion to approve the resolution 23-21 awarding the sale of $1,210,000 with general obligation corporate purpose bonds, series 2023A. I got
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Todd and a second by Kathy to approve resolution 23-21 for $1.21 million in general obligation corporate purpose bonds. Candace will vote.
Cop,
Yes.
Arts,
Yes.
Casper,
yes.
Killian,
Yes,
Doss,
Yes.
motion carries.
Okay, thank you, Brian. All right, that is the end of our action items on our agenda tonight. We'll move to information items, the first of which is I just lost my council packet, whatever that is. It is the ordinance about police vehicle parking.
I can start, and if the chief wants to fill in later, that's fine. With the addition of our senior center parking, there were concerns that we need to designate two stalls that have traditionally been used by police vehicles. They've generally used the two stalls on North Fourth Street immediately south of Furnace Street. And so the police department is requesting an ordinance to designate these for police vehicles only. In the ordinance, it says on-duty police vehicles only.
So what is the comparison as far as parking for the senior citizen? Where are those spots? There were some along here on Fourth Street.
The other side.
On there, if you look at the map cuts off at Mineral Street, and those stalls that are designated for the senior center are off the map to the south. You can see the four stalls in green on Mineral Street near the bottom of the map.
So these would be at the north end of
I think I do
Fourth
have,
Street.
I do have a copy of.
Yeah.
Ken?
I have it down here.
Okay, here's a copy from a couple of council meetings ago that show all the parking spots for the.
Sorry, I'll
These
I'll
are
have a,
north end, right, of,
yes. I will adjust the map a little bit so that it's clear, showing where these proposed stalls are and the new senior center parking stalls are.
so Doug, is there no parking in the parking lot behind the
The-
police department?
The upper lot that we refer to as the employee lot doesn't lend itself to rapid egress or exit. So that for the squads, time is shown that that is the quickest spots to be in to access the vehicle, and the officers are in and out of the PD multiple times during 12-hour shift.
So is this 24/7, 365, the
Those spots-
designation?
Yes.
Yes.
Any other questions? Ken?
No, I see it here. I have it here.
I don't think it should impact senior center parking because it's at the north end of the block, not at the south end of the block. So it's not really adjacent at all to City Hall. I
That's
mean,
our hope, that it wouldn't impact.
right.
The idea is that when people who used to park where the senior center park now, they would move up and spots, and we don't want that.
Any other questions?
So as far as the parking, so here's the older map, East Mineral. Do you have any police parking on East Mineral? Let's see, it'd be right below the area of the police station.
South of the police station in the angle parking and in the parking on Mineral Street. He's asked
Designated.
if you have any designated parking there.
We do not.
Do you have
Do
any
not.
designated parking anywhere?
For the PD, we have the lower lot that is squad parking.
Your police station.
Right.
But you don't have any
On,
Street.
not
On
on
street.
street.
other
no.
designated,
Not
so
on
right
street.
now, the only designated spots you have are on the police station block. The upper lot and or lower lot. that are behind, that are north of the police station. So this would be the first request for designated spots 24/7, 365 for police vehicles on street.
Correct.
I'm looking at the older map, excuse me, East Monroe Street. When I get down here on East Monroe across from the parking, which is next to the police, why is that one vehicle crooked there? That's just the way it was drawn,
See where you're talking.
right here.
Oh, that's just the way it was drawn, I think.
Is that real or is that,
He's talking about a map that Todd gave him from before. And
Oh.
there are little squares on East Mineral Street
is that
on the south side, and one is
out of
crooked.
alignment? So who
Okay.
made that
That's,
designation to be out of alignment?
okay, that would be our GIS people.
So that is not an error. Yes, it is an error.
It's
It's
an
out of
error in the
alignment.
drawing and not on the ground.
Yeah.
The parking
Well,
stall
if a new
is,
person looked at
That's
this,
fine.
looks rather strange. No, I wouldn't want to drive.
okay. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions on this new idea of designated 24/7, 365 police parking spaces? So Doug, we could expect if we are coming up that street, that would be the two places we would expect to see vehicles. If we designate these, that doesn't mean that if the others are open, they're gonna park in the others, right?
Correct. These are the spots that we
That
would,
they will be parking in.
that we want the on-duty squads to be in.
Okay,
It mimics what we did when we were in this building.
Okay.
We had the spaces in front of the
Okay.
PD then.
okay, good. All right, any other questions?
I was
Oh.
just gonna ask, are these spots directly then out from your Sally Port? Or are they,
Yes.
yes, they are. So that's excellent to control that area and.
Yep.
And keep oversized vehicles from causing a problem there.
So reviewing this, then these two spots, if I come along, am I allowed to park in those spots?
No, it would be for police on-duty vehicles.
And then, but I could park wherever there's spots around those.
Yeah, I think those are the first, there isn't one spot north of that, is there? So anything from there north, Ken, to Furnace Street is likely, actually, I think that's an entrance to that parking lot.
Correct.
That is a CenturyLink or Brightspeed or
Great speed.
whoever they are, parking lot. So there's an entrance to a parking lot there. And so those two yellow spots you're seeing are the first two spots on the north end of that block of Fourth Street. And there's only parking on one side of that street.
What is that black blob on North Fourth Street? What does that indicate? Is that another glitch as far as GIS?
Right by the word where
Yeah.
it says North Fourth, that's actually a vehicle parked in the stall when the photo was taken.
A what?
It's a vehicle, a black vehicle that was parked there
Oh,
when this photo was taken.
Okay, well, this will go on our agenda for action at the next meeting. If you have additional questions about this, see Doug with those questions prior to the next meeting. We know where to find him, I believe.
I guess what would help here is either have to walk the street or else you can show where the other parking spots are around these two that you want to designate for police, so we get a clearer picture as to what is going on here.
I think he wants little tan boxes for non-police parking spaces.
Okay.
How many, I don't know how many would be left, and I don't actually know if that street is marked with the little white. I mean,
They are.
I see that Ryan is shaking his head yes, so my belief would be that there's probably about 6 more spaces up that way. But I could be wrong, maybe 5. Okay. We'll see that the next time. All right, let's go on to B on our information and discussion. This is an ordinance amending the speed limits adjacent to city parks. Howard.
Okay, we've had more traffic near Smith Park specifically, and with the summertime, we have more around the pool and Legion Park. We've found that there's a state statute that allows cities to create a 15-mile-per-hour speed limit adjacent to parks when children are present. It's similar to a school zone. The city attorney confirms that we can use this authority for some parks, and we're not required to do it for all of them. So staff is recommending using this authority to create a 15-mile-per-hour speed limit adjacent to those parks. And I have a map with a red line showing which streets, because you need to include the jogs in those streets as well. It would repeal the 2002 ordinance establishing a 15-mile-per-hour speed limit between Memorial Day and Labor Day, so that it would only apply when children are present. We have had complaints over the years about requiring people to drive 15 miles per hour when children are not expected to be present. So this would probably help in those regards. You know, if somebody's driving at 11 o'clock at night, you shouldn't be expected to drive 15 miles an hour, kind of a thing.
And this would be year round.
But this would be year round,
So
and it would be,
there would be nothing about Memorial Day to Labor Day.
it would be year round, that's correct. And so it would be at the police officer's discretion, just like in a school zone, whether or not children are present where this would occur. Like I say, it works similar to a school zone enforcement.
And if I'm not mistaken, the school zone, state law says when children are also likely to be present, because what constitutes presence is another arguable issue. I certainly enjoyed up there that being that Memorial Day to Labor Day, because it's very clear. It's not someone driving through saying, I didn't see the kid, or the kids were behind the cars, or any of that. I just think this brings some argument again back to the same as we have in our school zones right now, is that there aren't children present. Well, when are children likely to be present? About 20 minutes prior to school, and then during school, the state law allows for a 15-mile-an-hour zone during the hours of school. So that's the only thing I see here. And we go back to the officer's discretion, which is great, but then we're gonna have people arguing what constitutes presence. So just a thought again.
Okay, are you talking about the second paragraph on the first page? That's what I was looking for here. There have been complaints from citizens about the 15-mile-per-hour speed limit at times when children are not expected to be present. Well, that, to me, did you talk about that?
That's kind of what I'm talking about. Something more clear and concrete.
Well,
If I
this-
know from Memorial Day to Labor Day, I need to do 15 miles an hour through there. Otherwise, I'm looking around guessing if there's children present. I think we see it on Main Street repeatedly in crosswalks where people are standing behind vehicles and they're not observable. And as you approach that crosswalk, they look at you like, why didn't you stop? They don't understand that they're standing behind a large vehicle and nobody can see them. So my concern is for children's safety. Children are small. They're able to be obscured by many things, to include parked vehicles. A person can easily claim, I did not see any children present. And therein lies the officer's, I guess, requirement to see what's reasonable there in terms of requiring that. I think something very concrete, very simple is better. And remove that whole arbitrary when children are present, because they can be present at any time around our parks and in our neighborhoods, I guess.
So
also.
we're talking about the same thing.
I think we are.
There have been complaints from citizens about the 15 miles per hour at times when children are not expected to be present. So I believe we're saying the same thing, that when do we expect them not to be present? So what time of the day are they expected not to be present at a place?
And I think our police officers have this discretion still, you know, that if it's 2 AM
But they
on a
might be-
Monday night,
But they might be present.
it's possible. But our officers have the same amount of discretion to take a look at that violation and use that discretion at 2 AM on a Monday night. As they would,
And it's dark, and so child, small. They could be,
possible.
so here's a complaint about it, and so I don't,
So Todd, are you,
this is not very clear.
so Todd, you're suggesting that the Memorial Day to Labor Day is more concrete
Concrete,
than
think
the
yeah, absolutely.
any time of the year when children are present.
Take a look around your school zones. We talked about the school zone by the middle school earlier that have no parking during certain hours because people are having a hard time negotiating curves and hitting parked cars, or in one case, a telephone pole. You know, we have this problem already with this law that says whether children are present somewhere or not. We have this problem of enforcement around our schools already. You know, why add another arguable issue up around our parks? 15 miles an hour, I could go somewhere else, drive around it. There's times when I drive around that 15-mile-an-hour zone if I. So just another side of the coin. I'm not saying there aren't a couple of ways to view this, but
So Todd, are you trying to argue then that it should just be 15 miles an hour?
yes.
No,
I would
you could
argue in
not
school, I would
say
argue in
when-
school zones, that should be 15 miles an hour
Hour.
from 7:30 in the morning until 4 PM also. And that gets rid of all the problems.
After 4 PM. There are people, school children working later.
I guess I'm just trying to look for the majority of them, is what I'm trying to look for.
So clarify for me, Howard, currently the 15-mile-an-hour Labor Day to, or Memorial Day to Labor Day is by the pool. Is it also on Pitt Street from Water Street to Second Street?
Correct.
So currently it's Memorial Day to Labor Day from Water Street all the way to Fourth Street.
Yes.
And that seems to work for our for the things that go on in those places, because the pool is only open between Memorial Day and Labor Day. And the majority of games that take place at Legion Field in terms of, although I don't know about soccer, that's probably, I don't know about all the things that go on at Legion Field. The real question is how to get a reduced speed limit by Smith Park. And you're proposing changing other things so that we can put 15 minutes by Smith Park.
Yes, I'm proposing to do this so that it's consistent. So that, as you just mentioned, that right now we have the Memorial Day to Labor Day essentially from Water Street to Fourth Street. I'm basically asking to extend the 15-mile-per-hour on Camp Street over to Fifth Avenue. And then I'm suggesting that we clean it up in accordance with the state statutes rather than doing the Memorial Day to Labor Day. But if you would prefer to do Memorial Day to Labor Day for that extension on Camp Street, I guess, I mean, I guess it's up to you all and, you know, the officers for enforcement. I'm just saying that I'm hearing from citizens that they don't like having to drive 15 miles an hour next to Legion or the pool at 2
9
in the
o'clock at
morning.
night.
And so this would modify it so that it's when children are present or expected to be present or whatever. One of the things that what I would do is I would actually insert the state statute language in the packet for next time so that you can see what the actual statute reads. If we're continuing with this 15 mph as staff suggests, but if you prefer just going Memorial Day to Labor Day, then I'll revamp this and go, whatever council desires.
Just gonna say, Chief, you have your people who are gonna have to enforce this and I guess if you wanna be a part of the discussion or what do you recommend, we would certainly like.
Like Howard had said, we hear complaints about 9 o'clock at night and having to go 15 miles an hour. And that is a typical shortcut, I'll say, across the north end of town. So that to allow people at odd hours or off hours to go 25. That seemed like a reasonable thing to do.
Yes,
Question.
now, I'll give you the example of Harrison Park. Harrison Park closes at what time?
10:30, I think it is.
10:30. Okay, what time does Smith Park close?
10:30.
I believe it's
10:30.
10:30.
10:30?
I believe all of the parks close at
Okay, and
10:30.
so are you saying in here that you're not gonna have it 15 miles per hour between 4 o'clock or something to 10:30? Is that
Saying
what's
that
being
if there,
said here?
if there were no children present, people would not be held to that standard.
But I can say for Harrison Park that in other words, if there's a child there, then he has to go 15.
If a
Is that right?
if a child would be adjacent to the roadway, if they're playing at the volleyball courts, I would argue otherwise.
Because they're over there playing some nights 10 o'clock at night. And
And
so
again-
you don't drive very fast past Harrison Park at night. So I can't see this complaint about, oh, I have to drive 15 when I go past this park. Because there are no children, but I've seen children there.
And again,
At night.
adjacent to the roadway or in the interior of the park.
They're coming to go to cars on the roadway that are parking on the roadway. So you don't go very rapid past those cars that are parked next to Harrison Park. And I don't see the difference between Harrison Park and Smith Park as far as parking. And to say we're gonna cut off the parking at what time, 4 o'clock, whatever, you have to stop listing 15, is that right?
There is no time cutoff.
We aren't talking about parking. We're simply talking about the speed limit.
Correct.
So we aren't talking about parking a car. We're talking about, and the only place that we're talking about this is on Pitt Street and on Camp Street. At this point in time, there is no 15-mile-an-hour speed zone around Harrison Park. Is that correct?
No.
Right. The only
But-
park
but
where
they
there's
are
a
still
15.
going slower past Harrison Park.
Well, that's good.
And we would
And that should
encourage
be
that.
taking place also at Smith Park.
Right.
I can't believe what's being said here.
What about consideration of the proposal for 9:30 when the parks close
Close at 10:30.
or 10?
Can I,
So you're
Everybody
suggesting,
Well, it's just that awareness that when the parks are open,
well,
have to, I mean, if this whole issue is coming up because there's increased traffic around Legion, that's not gonna let,
around Smith.
I'm at, around Smith. So what would that look like if we would change that avenue just whenever the park, I mean,
I guess personally, I'd like to see us extend what we have. I mean, I'd like to see us, I don't know what kind of speed and what kind of thing will happen after school starts. I mean, this playground opened in June. And we know that June, July, and August are the times when kids are out of school and they're running to the playground. And besides that, it's new. So a part of me says, rather than change it all, why don't we just extend the 15-mile-an-hour Labor Day or Memorial Day to Labor Day? Actually, school's going to start the 17th of August this year. So it's going to be started well before. And if this problem continues with lots of cars and lots of things, let's revisit it instead of making a wholesale change now because we have one new park. I mean, I've also had people come up and say they think we should have no parking at all on on Camp Street. It's too crowded. I mean, so there have been a lot of suggestions because it's a new park and a lot of people are coming. But what about trying to just extend this for this block in front of Smith Park, Memorial Day to Labor Day for this summer, and let's see how that goes. Ken?
So my question is, what do you do during the winter? Do you have skating? If the weather is cold enough, you have skating. So Howard, you're chuckling about that, but actually it's a problem too.
No,
In the wintertime,
I see what you're saying.
there'll be people
we
there
have the
that
skating.
children skating.
Can I ask a
at
question
Legion
with,
Park.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Can I ask a question in regards to the signs that were put up for our 15-mile-an-hour zones? It's the typical white one that says speed limit 15. Underneath it says when children are present.
Not
No,
currently.
Okay.
what it says is 15 miles per hour. And then it says Memorial Day to Labor Day as a supplemental sign underneath.
But we would be looking then to change that supplemental sign to when children are present.
Yes.
So I mean, this is
But-
your folks' decision, but I like the idea of drivers that are going to be engaged and actively looking for children. So from my point and perspective on it, comes down to a safety type of an issue. We're going to be giving authority then and discretion to law enforcement to be able to be there as well and to enforce that type of a safety standard, but it sets the baseline at 15. If you're actively engaging and looking and scanning your sectors and you're seeing that it looks clear, I can accelerate up to 25 and go down this road is how I visualize it. And trying to fit in the time zones and those other types of elements. Certainly we can go that way. If we're willing to try to do this for consistency's sake, we can always adjust back and go to a different method as well. So thank you.
And Doug, do you have some of those little gizmo, I don't know what they're called, those LEDs or whatever that shows your speed?
Yes,
And have we put any of
we
those up
periodically move those.
there?
Yes,
Yeah, they've been on Camp Street before.
Okay. I don't have, I'm willing to go either way, but I don't think, like Clint said, I don't think we want to get into time, like between 7:30 AM and 9:30 PM, or I don't think we want to get into that kind of thing. So to me, it's either Memorial Day to Labor Day, 15 miles an hour, and you put that underneath the 15, or it's 15 miles an hour when children are present, just like a school zone.
I'm also willing to meet in the middle here. If we want to try something different this year, that's fine. I don't see that Memorial Day to Labor Day as always being 100% successful either. You can see that sitting on the side of the street.
I think it needs to be extended. You just can't make
Um,
a chop off like that.
Well, that's what Todd just said.
But
All right,
would
so I
you like
think
me to-
we're saying go with the staff recommendation, bring that forward. Put in the language that's from the statute, so we have it, and bring that forward.
Okay,
thank you.
thank you.
All right, that's the last of our agenda information items, except for our work session. We have now a work session. So do we want to stay here for our work session, Or are we I mean, are you gonna use,
May use a presentation for my part, and then maybe for the council vacancy, we could relocate to the table or whatever.
Whatever,
City
okay.
manager would like.
all right. Does
But yeah.
anyone want a break before we go to work session?
I do need to grab some things off the printer so that you guys have hard copies of this
Okay,
presentation.
that's
So
fine.
if you want to take.
So if you want to take a couple minutes.
Let's take some minutes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very
Yeah.
good.
Take a couple minutes and we'll go.
Okay, so I think we might be tag teaming tonight. I think Dan may be talking to you as well.
Well, then Dan needs to
but-
find himself a microphone.
Well, he will when we get to that point.
Okay.
But what I'm doing here is just trying to provide you with a big picture overview of TIF generally for those that may not know that much about it. And then dive into the 2022 activity in our 3 TIF districts and some projections for the future for those TIF districts. And then Mr. Dreesens, I think, will be talking about a potential TIF 9, a new TIF. So TIF 101. And I gotta do 2 buttons here at the same time. That might be a bit challenging for me. Okay. So starting with an overview. So tax increment financing was first enacted in the state of Wisconsin in 1976. And since then, Wisconsin has been a national leader in using TIF to attract investments and jobs into the state. At this point, 70% or more of Wisconsin cities and villages are using TIF. And on average, amongst all of those TIF districts, for every $1 of investment within a Wisconsin TIF district, $4.66 of additional tax base is created by the TIF district. So that's why people are using TIF. So just to go over some TIF basics, you know that there's a lot of acronyms that are bandied around, and TIF and TID are used somewhat interchangeably, but I thought you might be interested to know what the difference actually is. So the TIF is tax increment financing, which is the actual tool, and then TID is the tax increment district, which is the boundary within where the tool is being used. So essentially, TIF allows municipalities to capture incremental property tax revenue from growth in a defined area to benefit that area. So we're going to come back to the growth concept in the next couple of slides. But essentially, it's all about growth in the TIF. There's a 12% rule that applies to every municipality, which relates to the value of the allowed value of TIF districts. So a new TIF, when it's being created, and the old TIFs, if they exist, together cannot exceed 12% of the municipality's equalized value. So you may hear about the 12% rule, and that's what it is. And then also, I wanted just to touch on the fact that since 1976, there have been many, many changes to TIF law made by the legislature, including last week, which was referenced earlier tonight. And that adds a ton of complexity to creating and maintaining TIF districts and understanding all of those rules. And we do engage some outside resources to help us with that. But I'm not going to get into all of those rules tonight because we would be here forever. So there's various types of TIF or TID districts. Industrial, oh, thank you. Industrial, mixed use, blight, rehabilitation conservation districts, and environmental remediation districts. And
Just a minute, when you say mixed use, what do you mean?
So mixed use allows for a combination of industrial, commercial, and housing or residential in the district. TIF districts are limited in life, but can be extended under certain circumstances. The limit is important because the idea is, as we mentioned before, at the end of the TID's life, it will create tax base that will be added to the city's tax base. So there's a limit of 20 years for mixed use and industrial TIDs, and 27 years for blighted and rehabilitation conservation TIDs. TIDs also have to close if all of the project costs have been met. And there is a period of time that's less than the total life that you can spend money in that TID, project cost end date. And so that is generally 5 to 7 years shorter than the actual life of the TID. Okay, so some pros and cons about TIDs, and these are just a few. There's probably many more that we could think of. But essentially, TID provides the city with a tool to attract development that otherwise would not occur. And that is part of the creation of a TID. The concept is the but-for rule. But for the TID, this development would not occur. So the idea is we are not just creating a TID around a development that was going to happen anyway, is already underway, but rather we're creating a TID to attract development, because if we did not have the TIF tools, we would not be able to get that development to come to the city. Another pro of TIF districts is that developers can be reimbursed for project costs from funds that otherwise would not exist. So this is in tandem with the but-for rule. So we're using the revenue streams from the taxes generated in the TIF to reimburse developers and to provide other ways to incentivize developers to build in the district. So those are the pros. Cons, the biggest con is that the city, and not the other taxing jurisdiction, is on the hook to cover TID costs if sufficient increment is not generated during the life of the TIF to cover all of the TIF costs. And that's a big hook. And it's something that we have to very seriously consider when we are working on developer agreements, when we're looking at our TIDs. And so bad developer agreements can overly burden the TID and can certainly therefore burden the city if they result in the TIF closing with a deficit fund balance or not covering all of its costs. Okay. So how does the TIF work? When the TID is created, parcels are identified which will be included in the TID. At the creation point, the value of these parcels is excluded from the TID's base value.
I believe that's fireworks,
That'd be fireworks, most likely.
like right outside our window, but it's okay.
It could be worse.
4th of July in a few days.
Is it 4th of July already?
It'll be going soon.
Well, soon, it's the 4th of July.
It'll go on for the next 2 weeks anyway.
I thought they were celebrating my presentation because it was so good.
Should timed it out right to be the end.
Yeah.
So as I was saying, at the creation of the TID, the value of the parcels is excluded from the TID. So in other words, the value of those parcels at point of creation stays within the city's tax base. It does not become a part of the TID. But the taxes on that base value continue to the taxing jurisdictions as before. So if you have $100,000 property that's already existing and it's a parcel that becomes part of a TIF, the taxes on that $100,000 parcel continue to go to those taxing jurisdictions, the city, the county, the school district, and the tech college. It's only the new growth or value in the TID that creates the increment for the TIF district itself. So looking at the next slide, you can see here, so what I've tried to capture here in this picture is if the TID was empty, let's say, when it started, maybe it's an empty field, then that would be your base value. And that would remain with the taxes generated on that base value going to the taxing jurisdictions. But if somebody constructed a new facility, a hotel or a factory or something, the new value generated by that new construction would, those taxes on that new value would be collected by the TID and do not go to the taxing jurisdictions. Now, in my picture, if you imagine that all of this in the picture was already created before the TID was created, then all of the value of those taxes would still go to the jurisdiction. And just new buildings that were going up would be the ones that would generate taxes that would be kept by the TID. And also, it's important to note that it's not just new construction. It can also just be value increases on existing property. So the base value is fixed. And then if that $100,000 property increases in value, let's say it goes up to 140,000, that 40,000 will generate taxes for the TID, not for the taxing jurisdictions. So their taxes, including the cities, stays at the based on the value at time of TID creation. So you might ask, well, why? Why would the city, because the city is included in this equation, why would the city give up taxes, and why would the other jurisdictions give up taxes that would be generated by the new development? And the simple answer is because the concept is that without the TID, the tax revenue wouldn't be generated. So they're actually not giving up anything. So I'll say that
That's the
again.
but for.
Pardon?
That's the but
That's
for.
the but for. So the concept is that if the TID was not created, there would not be the funding to provide the incentives, which would mean that developers would not come, which would mean there would be no new value. And so no taxes were being kept from the jurisdictions. And the city is a part of that. So the city also considers that because the city's giving up, quote unquote, future taxes, but it's actually not because those taxes would not be generated. The future tax revenue that's coming into the TID based on new construction and growth in the value of existing construction, that future tax revenue is used to offer the incentives to developers to hopefully bring their development to Platteville. So a couple of FAQs. I mean, you could come up with, probably 25 to 100 FAQs, but I just picked on a couple that I thought you might be most likely to hear. If my property parcel is in a TID, will my taxes go up? And the answer is no, they will not. The tax rate is the same whether the property is in or out of a TID. And another question that you may get asked is, does being in a TID change how the property assessment is determined if my parcel is in the TID? And the answer also is no. Property in a TID is assessed exactly the same way as other taxable property throughout the city.
Nicola, just
Yes.
a comment, based off of what you've all said in the past here, there's no question in my mind that, this is something we want to have. I know we have a time limit to develop this new TIF, which is going to take advantage of properties that haven't developed yet in other TIDs. That makes great sense, and I don't see any reason to argue against it and to not agree with it. My question is, how quickly can we move this along to a vote? Because
Sure.
I don't
And-
know that I need any more information than what you've already given me. We're
Okay.
either going to sit stagnant or we're going to take a risk. And there's no sense in not taking a risk as far as I can tell. We may be on the hook for something, but we'll be on the hook for something someday anyway. If anything, the hook of not growing.
Sure.
So, my thought is, and not to slow this down any, but if we're convinced, how quickly can we get this thing on? And get
Sure.
this going?
And I believe Dan is going to address that when he speaks to you, and that would be the information about the new TIF creation process. And there is statutory requirements for how fast we can move this along, but we're definitely working on it as much as we can and going as fast as we can, within compliance with the rules of TID creation.
You have a window, correct, if I recall some of the previous presentations.
A window of advantage, yes. So it's to our advantage to address this and get it accomplished before the beginning of August.
We
Or
got me
at the beginning
convinced,
of
so,
August.
I mean,
Yeah.
you got me convinced. We have to do something, so.
Well, wait till we talk about TID 6 and then you might not be so convinced. So any other questions on this first section? And after this, we go into the reports.
Are you does the city of Platteville have any spec buildings?
No,
Hey, what?
we
Do
don't
they
have any spec.
Buildings. Years
Yeah, I don't
ago, we
know.
used to have spec buildings. We expected that they would sell or be used within about 5 years. Do we have anything in the way of spec buildings being built right now? When I go to Dubuque, I think there's a couple of them on the road, along the road there. They look like they're spec buildings to me. Does Platteville have any?
No, apparently not, so I've been told. No,
Why not?
Maybe Dan can address that when he comes up. I
Okay.
believe it's I think it's a matter of money. And so
Okay,
perhaps
well-
Dan will address that when he comes up in terms of construction costs.
Who's gonna
So-
address that?
Dan, that
Dan?
guy right back there. All right. let's
okay,
Let Nicola finish her presentation.
thank you. No more fireworks. Okay, so TID 5 is the first one we're going to talk about. And you have a little a map there of TID 5. You can see Menards and Walmart portrayed as an overhead photograph. And the boundary here is in the green color, and you can see that it is adjacent to the city boundary as well, which is blue. So looking at TID 5, TID 5 was created in 2005. The last date to incur project charges in TID 5 was June 28th of 2020. And the dissolution date, according to the original plans, was June 28th of 2025. And we are on track to close the TIF in 2025. The TIF is a mixed use type of TIF, and you'll know that from the Keystone developments out there, as well as these commercial buildings and other commercial buildings in the TIF. The maximum life of this TIF was 20 years. It does have an extension potential for affordable housing. I'm not going to get into that tonight because we'd be here for a very long time. We can come back to that in a separate discussion when we get closer to that point. But when we get to the next slide, we'll see that there's a lot of revenue generated by this TIF. And so there's a question as to whether we really want to wait an extra year to get that tax base into the city. You can see just a few years of the growth in the TID, the added value in
Nicola, advance your slide.
Thank you.
Twice. Thank you. Twice. Or maybe, oh, okay.
Okay, so the added value, yeah, from 2019 through 2022. And I know you see the drop of 7% versus the two increases of 6% each. And that is due to the state equalization process. So the assessors assess the value of the property in the TIF districts as well as everywhere else, and they submit that to the state. But the state then does their sausage making with the equalization process, and so and the timing of that, you know, it's early in the year when the assessors file the MAR report, and it's later in the year when the equalization process completes. And so sometimes there is some differences that are generated through timing. So that's why there was a decrease in TID 5. Okay, so moving to the next slide. Now what we're looking at is the sources and uses of funds from the beginning of the TIF life through 2021. Then the next column is the actual 2022 results, and then projections for 23 through 25. And I will let you know that these projections for all these TIF districts that I've done are what I would call basic projections. So they don't build in a lot of, anticipated tax increases or value increases. They're kind of flat. So they're pretty conservative. So going back to the actual 2022 activity, you can see there that the total funds for the TIF generated were $912,035. And of that, $900,567 was tax increment. And then down below, you can see the uses of funds. So there was some expenses related to infrastructure, site development. There were probably, I'd have to actually go back and see what those were. Promotion, development, organizational costs. So that those are the incubator and the Grant County Economic Development costs are shared between the three TIFs. A little bit of administrative costs, and then the big costs in the TIF are the debt service, $368,064. And so before we get to the highlighted row, those costs are the standard costs for TID 5. And you can see that in 2023 is the last debt service payment for TID 5. And then in the projected 24 and 25, there are no debt service payments for the TIF. So let's talk about the green row at the bottom. So TIF 5 shares its revenue with TIF 7. TIF 7 was struggling. And so an amendment was made so that TIF 5 could share its excess increment with TIF 7. So the excess is all of the revenues minus the standard expenses, and what's left can go to TIF 7. So for 2022, that number was 523,438. And you can see how it's projected out through the rest of the years. So at the very bottom, you see the ending fund balance. Because TIF 5 is allocating its extra increment over to TIF 7, then there is neither fund balance or deficit. We always use the exact amount that's available to send it to TIF 7. And so we anticipate that that there will be no excess increment at the end or fund balance at the end of the life of the TIF. If there was fund balance left, it would be shared amongst all the taxing jurisdictions. And if there was a deficit at the end, guess who's on the hook? The city would be on the hook. Okay, so that's TIF 5. Let's go to TIF 6. So TIF 6 is our problem child, if you like. You can see the boundary here. The boundary of TIF 6 is in blue, and it looks particularly heavy on the city boundary because that's where TIF 6 is adjacent to the city's boundary. Okay, so TIF 6 was created in 2006. The last date to incur project charges was in 2021. The original date of dissolution was in 2026. This is also a mixed-use TIF. It had a maximum life of 23 years, but we have extended it by 6 years. And when we look at the chart in a minute, we'll see that. So you can see that lately we have had some growth in TIF 6 with 3%, 4%, 7%, and 2% from 2019 to 2022 consecutively. And part of the growth has been the UBSOX packet commercial office building, IWI motor parts expansion, and then there's a little bit just from the state equalization process. Okay, so looking at the projections for TIF 6, so again, you can see the costs, the sources and uses of funds through 2021, and our actuals from for 2022. Sorry, the little tiny numbers here. Hopefully your printed copies are a little easier to see. And then the projections out to 2032. And here you can see the two extensions, the standard extension and the technical college extension. And those extensions had to be approved by the Joint Review Board. Okay, so looking at 2022's activity, you can see that the sources of funds were 590,842 with 587,513 of tax increment, and then a little bit from state aid, which is replacing things to do with property taxes and personal property taxes. And then the uses of funds, again, you've got the incubator and the Grant County Economic Development in the promotion development organizational cost line item. Then you've got administrative costs there, which includes legal fees, and then the debt service payments. So if we look at the green area at the bottom, you can see that at the end of 2022, TIF 6 had a deficit of 573,000. And if you look across and scan your eyes across, you can see that the deficit continues to grow over the next few years, and then it begins to contract in 2029 and going forward to 2032. And you can also see that this projection shows a deficit ending balance at the end of the life of the TIF. So a couple of things have happened in the last few years, since we probably last talked about TIF in this depth. One is that we were anticipating that Cummins would be coming and they didn't. So the Scannell development, which was the builder of the warehouse, did not come. There was a problem between Cummins and Scannell related to increasing costs that resulted from the pandemic. And so that development did not occur. When that development was built into the projections, everything looked rosy, and we might have even been able to close early. But now we obviously don't have that revenue built in. So one of the things that is reflected in this projection is that the PADIG cost, which is the Platteville Area Industrial Development Corporation, that cost is currently being paid by TID 6. But if a new TIF is created that overlaps TIF 6 and is, which is going to be that same area, or at least partly, then though that cost could be allocated to the new TIF instead of being borne by TID 6 for the years 2024 through 2032. And so that is reflected in this projection. If it were not, if PADIG continued to be paid out of TID 6, then the picture would be a little darker at the end of the life of the TIF. The other thing that I want to note is, as I stated, this projection is conservative. You can see that the increment is flat throughout the remaining years of the TIF at 592,559. If tax rates increase during that period of time, which seems likely, then actually the increment will grow. And if the value in TID 6 also were to grow, then that number would change as well, and it would grow. Now, I can't count on that, but it is to be hoped that property values generally continue to increase. Okay, there was a developer agreement that was established with Southwest Health before the project cost end date. And you've seen the developments already occurred, the infrastructure that has been put in, and we're hoping that there'll be new development. And I think that Dan might touch on that as well. Okay.
Okay, question, standard and technical college extensions. Would you explain those in more detail, please?
I'll make an attempt. I haven't reread that information lately, so I'm going to be pulling from.
So where are these located?
Where are what located?
Standard and technical college extensions.
So the extensions are extended years of time.
So here's the standard extension, these 3 years. Here's the technical college extension. This is an extension of the time. And the standard extension is just.
It's just that it's an extension that can be requested of the Joint Review Board, and that they can consider and approve or deny, which they approved. And the technical college extension is one of those law changes that came into play. And it has to do with the state changing some things that meant that I think they funded technical colleges to a greater degree out of the state budget, which meant that the levy that needed to be raised by technical colleges dropped. So the tax rate dropped, which meant tax increment dropped in TIF districts. And so to kind of offset that, the state allowed TIF districts to extend for another 3 years to kind of help recover through time the lost revenue. Dan, if you've got anything to add to that. Okay.
So extension means extending the time.
So
of
more
TIF from
years.
27 to 30 to 33, or from 20 to 23 to 26, however it was.
So another way to put it is, if you see 2026 in this example, the tax increment was 592,559. And let's say nothing changed and that was the tax increment still actually in 2026 and the TID closed. That 592,000 would become part of our tax base, and that increment would be split out between the jurisdictions, because that represents the combined tax rate for all of the different jurisdictions. The tax rates all added together, which is what you get on your tax bill. So each jurisdiction would get its portion of that increment in the years 2027 going forward. But if you extend the TID, that 592,000 stays going to the TIF for each of the years of extension. So you're extending how long the revenue can keep coming to the TIF instead of going to the jurisdictions. And the Joint Review Board, just as a reminder, is made up of those taxing jurisdictions. So it is the taxing jurisdictions themselves that have to decide and approve whether or not they will approve a new TID and also whether they will extend a TID or amend a TID.
So there's something going special to the technical colleges?
It's not going to the technical college. That's just a name that the state gave that particular type of extension.
That's confusing.
It is. Yeah, but not my fault.
Because right now we're going such a battle with losing technical colleges. We have 13 in the state and we're losing some of these. Some of them being written off.
I did not know that. But that and this are not related.
It's poor, in my opinion, it's poor terminology, frankly.
I agree.
Any-
One more thing to confuse you, but
Confusion. Okay.
Any other questions on TIF 6 before we move on? Okay. So now TIF 7, the downtown area, which is outlined in this kind of peachy pink color. We're familiar with TIF 7 because of the library and the Holiday Inn and Ruxton and so forth.
And this is not a mixed use TID.
This is not. This is, and actually I'll go to the next slide. This is considered a blight district, which is kind of a strong term. But it does reflect if there's properties that are not growing in value. And I actually don't have a definition of blight in front of me, but it does represent areas where there's the property is struggling or there's challenges to the property, difficulties encountered.
Actually, the definition is if a property is not generating the tax that it could generate,
Thank you.
then it's considered to be a blighted property.
Okay.
So one could look at the parking lot at McGregor Plaza and say that there's a lot of parking lot there that is not being used. So that part that is not being used is actually blighted property. So it doesn't have anything to do with how it looks. It has to do with whether or not it's generating the tax that it could generate.
Thank you for that clarification. So the TID 7 was also created in 2006. The last date to incur project charges in TID 7 is 2028. The dissolution date is 2033. And right now we're on track to be able to close in 2033 without a deficit. The maximum life on this TIF district is 27 years, and it does have extension potential as the other TIFs do. And then you can see the change in values over the last 4 years. And in actual fact, there was a tiny increase from 21 to 22 reflected as 0% on this chart. But it did see growth due to the Ruxton development and in years prior to that due to the Holiday Inn. Okay, moving forward to the results. So in the actual 2022 column, you can see that the tax increment generated annually here was 440,000 with some guaranteed payments made by the developer. So when we create developer agreements, one of our protections is to have a guarantee built into that agreement. And that guarantees that if the development does not generate the increment that is anticipated and agreed upon by the city and the developer, that the developer will pay the difference. And that's the guarantee. And then you can see the total sources of funds was 1,049,466. And you can see also here in the kind of peach highlight is the money coming in from TID 5. So that is the shared increment from TID 5 at 523,438 in 2022. And then you can see the uses of funds, so the promotion, development, organizational costs and admin costs, the debt service of 746,000 in 2022. And then the lease payments to the developer. So you'll remember that we, the city, don't own the library. The developer owns the library and we are paying lease payments to them. And according to the agreement, that is until midway 2025, built into the projection as well. And then you can see here that at the end of its life in 2027, that that's just showing you the next 5 years. The end of life would be 2033. And that's the number at the last column, showing a fund balance, a positive fund balance of $637,900, which would be shared out between the various jurisdictions. Okay, so last slide I'm going to talk about, just an overview summary. So TID 5, generation of tax increment, is providing the critical support for TID 7, projected to close in 2025, and a 1-year extension would be allowable for an affordable housing related project. TID 6 I said here that TID 6 is anticipated to recover project costs within the 6 years of extension, if we allocate the paid cost to TID 9, and that's also assuming that there is growth in the tax rate and growth in the value of those of the TID district itself. And the deficits that you saw generated in the next few years will need to be addressed through a debt restructuring, so that the city does not have to advance from the general fund in those intervening years. And then finally, TID 7 is projected to cover project costs by the end of its life, due to the revenue sharing from TID 5 and due to the developments in there. Any questions? Nope. Okay, I'll hand over to Dan.
This a question about this. Ruxton. Ruxton.
And you have to get closer to the
We
microphone.
were to get a base value, so we would get some income from that project. About, was it 5,000 square feet or something like that?
I don't have that. I don't have that information in front of me, but I can look
But
at
it
that.
made it, that, there was a portion that was supposed to be supplying money, as I read it, supplying money to the city of Platteville. And then the city of Platteville gave a loan to, who was it, General Capital Group, is that correct?
That's the developer, yes.
Yes, to the developer, and that doesn't get paid off until about 2038.
Now,
Is that correct? That's about the time it gets paid off. So we're not getting any money
I
as
think
far as the general fund because we're not, they're paying off their loan that we gave them. And so my question is, are we getting any money from Fenimore, a technical college, because that portion of the building has now been taken over by Fenimore. So do they pay us taxes? Do they pay taxes directly to the general fund?
the technical college would be tax exempt.
well,
that was
what,
not- that was
if I'm,
not
first
the-
of all,
That was
I
not.
want to
the
clarify a couple of things.
That was not the intent. The intent was we would earn money from that portion of the building. So if the technical college took that over and they're tax exempt, then we lost out on that project.
First of all, I believe the technical college is renting from Ruxton, and the taxes generated from Ruxton are on the entire building, regardless of who they rent to. So I don't think that would make a difference. And then,
Who gets the taxes?
The
the
TIF.
TIF district,
The TIF,
on the value that's above what
but I,
was the base value.
I look, I look at it from a standpoint, there's a base value there to the Pioneer Ford, a portion, base value, that portion should be a tax going to the city.
Yes,
And
it does.
it
The
was.
base
And
value does
so-
go to
so
the
it
city
was-
and the other
was
jurisdictions
made-
for that piece.
It was made to go to Fenimore and they're tax-free. So I think that was a mistake.
Because they're renting.
Okay, then because they're renting, then why aren't we getting the taxes as a city?
We are on the base value. And
Are we getting the taxes to the city? Not as part of the loan, to pay off the loan, but as part of payment to the city.
the property, the entire building generates tax increment that goes to the TIF district, and the whatever was the value, the base value, continues to be shared to the other to the other jurisdictions.
Yeah, I'd like to find out what's going to the other jurisdictions, which would be the city and who else?
The city, the
And
county,
so forth.
the school district, and the
Yes.
technical college.
So I'd like to find out that information.
Sure, I can get that for you.
Okay, that's what.
And the other thing I wanted to mention was, I'm just looking at some detailed numbers here for the, because I tried to just give you an overview on TIF 7. You mentioned that the debt payments, on that project went out through 2038, and you're absolutely right. So that's amazing memory. And the TIF is scheduled to close in 2033. What that means is that there would be enough fund balance in the TIF to be able to pay off the remaining debt before it closed. So the city or nobody else is having to make those loan payments out to 2038. It would be taken care of before the TIF closed. But amazing memory.
Well, we're going to listen to Dan here.
Dan, you have something to hand out to us?
No, we're just gonna talk about TID number 9 tonight and the concept of it.
And,
Because the map has to be approved by the plan commission prior to it being presented to the council.
we have something to read here?
No, you're gonna listen.
Nothing to read?
You can just listen. It's okay.
Listen.
No test afterwards either. So first of all, with regards to spec building, currently, Platteville does not have any spec buildings. And the reason is primarily, the ability to pay for it. So right now, a spec building is gonna cost you $1 to $2 million, for a pre-engineered steel building. That's in the 30 to 40,000 square foot range by the time you put in lot, grading, site utilities, et cetera. So currently, no, we do not have one. In Keeler, they currently are building a new spec building, which is a 90,
Two of them.
no, they're building one. The other two buildings are going to house individual businesses. So the larger building is a 90,000 square foot building, and they have a local developer who is basically footing the bill for those. No assistance from the county, from the town of Jamestown, nothing. He's basically, it's Jeff Kaiser, he's from Keeler, and that's his way of giving back to the community.
Okay, but is he as a business going into the building?
No,
But in a sense, there's a spec to him.
it is, correct, right. He's
So
building a building,
how many spec buildings do we have there? I go
There's
by and I
one.
see two.
there's one. There's only one spec building.
The other two are being built by someone else for businesses that are going in
Correct.
there. So
That's
they're
what
not
we're-
speculative. They're
actual-
already,
Right,
they're already somebody's business.
yes.
Well, they've been standing idle for some time as I go by.
No, they were just constructed this last spring.
Yeah, that's what I mean, as far as idle. They've been, I go by there frequently.
Working on the projects and I mean, today there was 20 cars around them with contractors working on them, so not sure. Well, anyway, talking about TID number 9. So as Nicola was going through all the timelines, we have 3 TIF districts, 5, 6, and 7. 5 and 6 are out in the industrial area. slash Keystone area. Right now, none of those TIF districts, 5 or 6, can incur any additional project cost, which also means that we cannot put in a water, a sewer, a street, a water tower, nor can we offer any type of cash incentive to a developer to come into our community. So, at PAYDAC, we had multiple discussions about when the time was right, which was when either one of these TIF districts closed or the 12% equalized value test was met, which currently we're at 11%, 11.11% exactly, that we would look at getting a new TIF district created so that the city of Platteville can now offer incentives to potential developers. Does not mean they have to be offered, but we have the ability to do that, yes.
We had TIF 8
TIF 8 is closed,
and that's closed.
correct, because that was basically a 100% TIF, pay-as-you-go developer incentive, TIF district for the former hospital property. And essentially, when they have their debts paid off, then the TIF district closed and that went back on the property, the tax roll. So all that money now, instead of it going to the TIF district to pay off the infrastructure improvements, therefore now goes to the city, the county, the school district, and the technical college.
And I know some people there and I find that to be a good place to go to. It's, to me, it's well built. Well, anyway, go ahead.
So, so essentially what we're looking at here is, like I say, once again, through PAYDAC, we're looking at kind of been watching these TIF districts a little bit to see how they've been going on. Now, right before, the expenditure period of TID number 6, expired, a couple years ago, 2 different developer agreements were entered into. One was with Cummins / Scanell, and the other one was Southwest Health Center. They were basically last minute developer agreements to try to take advantage of TID number 6. Well, the Scanell Cummins project, did not proceed because of some cost increases and some due to COVID, and the Southwest Health Center project did proceed. So one of those 2 projects proceeded, but they both were looking to move forward because of the potential for cost incentives. Scanell / Cummins is going into the industry park. In the industry park, you can get property for $1 an acre. Sometimes that's enough, but a lot of times it's not. And in this case, the city of Platteville was basically going to give them $1 per acre of property, but there was no other incentive able to give to them. The incentive was going to be used to maybe do some other improvements with the industry park. If we had the ability to do a pay-as-you-go TIF district, which is what we're proposing right here, then we would have the opportunity to maybe offset some of those increasing costs that Scanell and Cummins was going to incur. And that's really what we're looking at right here as an option to move forward with another TIF district here. The TIF district area, and that's why I don't have any maps tonight, is kind of being worked out with the plan commission and city staff. But basically, it's going to be the undeveloped portions of TID number 5 and TID number 6. That's the intent. The intent is not to bring in any of the developed properties or there's a couple that we have to just because of being contiguous, because we always have to be contiguous with everything. But that's really what the intent is here, is to then be able to offer the ability to give somebody an incentive. Right now, the city has no projects planned. There could be some projects, but there are no projects planned. So we don't have to worry about a TID number 6 where the city went and did a bunch of investment out in the industry park. And then it's the you build it, they come. This is you come to us, we have an incentive to give you, you pay for it, and we will pay you back with the tax increment. So it's a completely different mindset than what was used to develop number 6. Very comparable to how TID number 5 was developed. And you can now see the success of TID number 5. The costs that the city have into TID number 5 are not necessarily because the city went out and did the work and did all that development themselves. They actually bought out the developer's debt in order to be able to capture all of that TID increment and be able to do more with it. For example, fund TID number 7. So that's really what we're talking about here. It's not going through and extending Vision Drive or extending Enterprise Drive. Now, they will be in the project plan as potential projects, but only if there's money available. So that's probably the biggest sell about TID number 9, this new proposed TID, is that we're not looking to be developers in this. The city of Platteville is not. It's going to be, we are looking at a way to incentivize developers talking about the Skinnell Cummins project. The project, when they were originally looking at it, they were okay with $1 an acre property. They were gonna get 22 acres for $22. That was a huge savings for them in terms of land. They go to the city of Dubuque, they're probably going to spend $4 million. I think it's either 200,000 or 100,000. So they're going to spend 2.2 or $4.4 million on land that they don't have to. However, the city of Platteville, because we didn't have the ability at the time, because the expenditure period of TID number 6 had expired, could have maybe stepped in and said, hey, we now also have this TIF district, TID number 9, that could say, we will help offset those increase in costs, because that's truly one of the things about the TIF that it's meant for, is to take a project that maybe would not normally be financially feasible and bridge that gap to make it feasible. All developers, except for maybe the gentleman in Keeler, their intent is to come in and make money. They're not in here to be nice people. They're because they want to make money. And even in the TIF manual, it flat out says that it is meant to make that developer the ability to make his money to come in and do the development. And that's what we're looking for right here. So we come into the questions to consider to create a new TIF district, and it really comes down to the but for. Nicola touched base on it in the first part of her presentation. But for doing the TIF, or but for doing the TIF incentive, would they come? Well, for Skinnell and Cummins, we don't know that because it was a different time and a different place. But now moving forward, we have a new developer that comes in and wants to either develop in the industry park. Maybe they want to develop on the Harms property. Maybe they want to develop some property within Keystone Development. For example, the residential component of it. We have some single family homes, but the multifamily never got developed just because of that was kind of a phase down the road, and that just the dollars weren't there. But this would have the ability to bridge that that gap in there per se for that. So that's really what we're talking about with TID number 9. And really, Nicola did a good job about going over the basics of it, but that's how how TID number 9 is going to be different than the others. Now, does that mean that every developer that comes in here has to get an incentive? No, does not mean that. Someone comes in here and they select a lot that already has water and sewer and a street to it, and they can get their land for $1. Do they need incentive? No, probably not. Or maybe they don't get the 100% incentive like Southwest Health Center did. Maybe it's a 50-50 incentive. Maybe it's a 70-30 incentive. Maybe they get their TID increment, whatever they generate, back for 5 years, 10 years, some time frame period. And then the remainder of that money stays in that pot, and we're going to call it a kitty for TID number 9 to be able to do some projects that could maybe do further incentive. So for example, in 2000, this TID number 9 goes through. In 2024, we have a developer that comes in and that wants to buy 3 or 4 of the lots that are in the industry park right now between Pro and East Side Road. They don't necessarily need the full incentive. So they get 75%, they get 50%, just to make easy numbers. We're going to say they get a 50-50 incentive. They pay, and in the time frame, they're going to generate $1 million in TID increment. So the city would get 500,000, they would get 500,000. Now the city would be able to take that $500,000 and basically that, kind of playing with house money and utilize that, and then maybe extend Vision Drive. That would allow them to potentially develop more property over there, allow them to maybe extend water and sewer further south of the hospital to Enterprise Drive to maybe get some development down through there. Or they could utilize that and they could actually do a true cash grant if they wanted to, but they have to have the funds there. With the idea that the funds have to be there before any cost is incurred. So that's really what the whole idea behind TID number 9 is a true pay as you go. Yes.
So it's a new TID.
A new TID, correct.
I do have a question. Southwest Health, they built a new building. Where is it? Keeler?
Yep. Cuba City, Keeler, and now Darlington.
Yeah, and so I know about the one at Keeler. So where did they get the money from?
They privately funded it.
That's a private funding, but the city's involved with Southwest Health as far as, we're paying for part of the EMS. The city has an agreement to pay every year roughly $100,000 to Southwest Health.
114,000 in 2022.
Yes, it's over $100,000. And so what I've looked at through the years is that we're paying enough money to them, the city of Platteville and the townships, we're paying enough money to pay off their EMS building. We're paying for the EMS building. So when we get down to the end of the 7 years, what do we have? We have an agreement where the building is paid for, but now what's gonna happen then at the end of 7 years? Because are they gonna say to us, well, we better keep on paying money to Southwest Health for this building and so forth?
Yeah, I guess I'm not.
We're,
familiar with
we're
the
paying
agreement,
for
so-
EMS services.
We're contracting for service.
So, you
That-
know,
we were
that
doing it over
includes
here,
the
too.
cost of the building, but the whole kit and caboodle, the people, the equipment, and the building, yeah.
And
And
uh,
we're paying for the building, period.
Well, I would have to say that we're paying for the building and the equipment and the people.
So,
and just so you know,
so
that is on the
it
tax.
seems a little strange because we're paying for the building and then they go out and they build in other places. They have enough money to do that.
Dan, you were going to tell us about the timeline. Todd had a question about the timeline for getting through this and that kind of thing. So can you review the timeline for the creation of this proposed TID number 9?
Yep. So tomorrow at 3 PM, I believe, is there 2 or 3? 3, 2? 2 or 3 o'clock tomorrow.
Three.
We're having our first joint review board meeting. And we basically have to, traditionally it was set up as an organizational meeting, but there is a standing joint review board for the city of Platteville. So it will be more or less a review of the existing TIF districts, right? Which,
Who's we?
the
Who's
joint,
we?
the joint review board.
The joint review board.
Oh,
Yes.
who's on the joint review board?
School district, a representative from the city of Platteville, an at-large member from the city of Platteville, the Grant County, and a representative from the Southwest Technical College. Basically, it is the 4 taxing jurisdictions plus an at-large member.
And that is that composition is constituted by law.
Correct. It's by statute.
And then they're supposed to be working, this group is supposed to be working on the TIFs through the years.
No, they review the TIFs.
They reviewed a TIF.
Correct.
Now, when you go back in history to, what's his name, Larry Berkey? Larry Berkey came here and he just went out by himself and signed up without any input, from what I can find out,
That-
as far as from you people.
That's a difference between creating a TIF. So the joint review board reviews in general tax increment
but-
districts and their
Okay.
formation,
Did they?
but they
review-
don't review development agreements.
Did they review what he?
Yes.
No,
Larry
because
Berkey came
Yeah,
up
the
with-
yeah.
joint review board wouldn't have reviewed the development agreement.
No, but the joint review board did review the creation of TID number 5, TID number 6, TID number 7, and TID number 8.
But-
They have to.
But Larry Berkey came from Mount Orb and he bypassed the people in here and set up the agreement.
Developer agreement.
Yes.
Yeah, that has nothing to do with
Yeah, but
TIF
he's,
districts or
he,
creation of TIF
he,
districts.
he went around you people. Whoever was in charge, he went around.
Yeah, I wouldn't probably disagree with that, but but
Well,
anyway,
That's what happened.
So can you go ahead and tell us about the timeline?
yes. So tomorrow we're meeting with the joint review board, which was traditionally the organizational meeting, but since there's a standing joint review board, we are just going to be talking about the project in general. On July 10th, we were having a public hearing at the Plan Commission level for the project plan, and that is when the official map is going to be produced and presented to everybody. At that time, just like any other public hearing, we'll have a presentation, we'll have statements for, statements against, and then the plan commission can decide how they would like to proceed with the proposed project plan for TID number 9, including the map, and they can make additions, subtractions, recommendations, etc. At the July 11th council meeting, which is the following night, it just happens to be the following night just because of how things are scheduled. We will be presenting the draft project plan that was presented to the plan commission as well as information only. If there are changes from the plan commission, I will present those as well that night. Then on July 25th at that council meeting, the council has the opportunity to do a creation resolution that would actually create the TIF district. We also have the ability that if at July 10th, July 11th, there are some changes that are going to take a little bit more time, we do have the ability for the August 8th council meeting to have the creation resolution at that point in time. So, but on either July 25th or August 8th is when this TIF district, if it proceeds, would be created. The key here is to have it created by August 15th, which is when the new value limit test comes out. Currently, the city of Platteville is at 11.11%. We do not necessarily know how all the assessments are going to vary between 2022 and 2023. So the key is to get this creation resolution done prior to the release of that document. Yes, Ken.
Question, the presentation to the plan commission, how many times are they gonna see this document?
They will
Once,
they will see it once, correct. They will get it sent
In
to
other
them a
words,
week at a time.
they see it once, and then that's it, they have to vote on it.
That's correct. That's how the
So,
rules are.
To me, that's not. You got about, what, 7, 8 people on the plan commission? A variety of people, and to me, that's not enough reviewing by people, just one time,
It is a public hearing,
so.
and it was the public hearing notice was in the paper
Yeah, but it's only
last
one-
week and this
it's only
week.
one-
I'm just following the rules. If, at any given time, the
Sorry.
council, at any given time, the
I-
plan
I've
commission,
seen-
the council, the joint review board can request additional meetings.
I've seen this type of thing take place. You have something coming only once, and you expect somebody to vote on it. Once.
I guess it would be up to the plan commission to table it, but then they run the risk of delaying the
Yeah,
approval.
seems to me you have the plan commission on our deadline.
Well, we're all kind of on a deadline.
We're all on a deadline, yes. And when,
But
when I, and
At
when,
least we have a couple times to do some of these.
Well,
things.
I think
and the plan
the plan
commission,
commission, we've been talking about TID, so I think that,
yes.
I mean, we have a couple of people who are engineers where I don't see a big problem. Todd, do you?
No,
Well,
not at all.
I mean, Todd's on the
I
plan
can
commission
see a
too.
Problem with it.
Pardon?
I can see a problem with it. I
Okay.
think people are gonna be uninformed, so you have people that's voting along and not knowing exactly what they're doing, period.
Well, at this point, here we sit as a city with nothing to offer anybody. Anything is better than that at this point. Now, our taxes are gonna go up and God knows what's gonna occur in the future in regards to the economy. But we have nothing to offer. I don't, and I think we sit there with absolutely nothing. Taking a chance, perhaps we lose, perhaps we win. As one old fella told me out in the industrial park when he owned about half of it, he said, you're either growing or you're dying. I think that could be used in a city's sense also. You're either gonna continue to try to grow, or that's it, you start to recede.
Yeah.
And
this doesn't take any annexation. It doesn't actually take any land that's not currently in a tax increment district. So it's just rearranging the boundaries of the current districts to find a way to be able to generate some kind of incentive for development.
Correct.
Okay,
Now, we had discussion on development of smaller housing. Smaller units. What is the status of that? Do you know, anybody know here? We talked about that.
Right, there was a
Last year.
developer, there was a housing developer that came in with kind of a preliminary plan. Joe, would it be correct to say that developer hasn't been back? That's a
Talking about
private
15
developer.
years ago, north of the old fish building supply, we're talking about that development.
No, we're talking about out in Golden Heights.
Golden Heights.
Okay, so we're talking about Golden Heights. There was a developer that came in and had a kind of said, I'd like to, but then didn't follow through. So, you know, I guess Dan, to me, the thing that Dan said tonight that is most revealing is that Keeler has a spec building because an individual who lives there, who didn't get any incentive to do it or not, is investing that individual's own $2 million to do this building. And if we can find somebody who wants to invest $2 million or $1 million to build a building, I mean, either it's done by a private developer or the city comes up with $2 million to get a spec building, if a spec building is the thing. I mean, there's only, somebody's got to pay.
And it's tough when you have public funds. And Ken, you mentioned 5 years is kind of the time frame. Is that you have $1 million or 2 million or 3 million or where the dollar amount is tied up in a building being sitting vacant. And you even mentioned driving by, there's no activity. And that was one of the big issues that, while I was on paydeck when I first got on, that's when the last spec building sold, and it had sat there for 4 or 5 years. And I know every month we got a question, well, where are we at with it? How much did we promote it? And that came from the council representative on the time on the board. Because it was a it was something that was on the balance sheet.
It was money that wasn't making money. And a private developer would be investing money that they could invest somewhere else. Making money. Okay, does the joint review board meet again, or do they just see it one time?
They,
You
yeah,
talked
they,
about-
sorry, they do meet after the creation resolution within 45 days. So that's basically what we do at the joint review board meeting for the creation of a new TIF district is basically we want to make sure that they're all happy. We don't want to go through the entire process and then have them at the very end say, no, we decided we don't like this. Cause that's just, you're just wasting everybody's time and money. So one of the items that we will be reviewing tomorrow is to make sure that even though there'll be no form of motion, it'll be county, Southwest Tech, school district, and at large member and the city member. But I would like to believe the city member would be in favor of it. That everybody's kind of on board, have any questions, any concerns, and kind of get everybody nodding. Yes, we're in favor of this. And if somebody's not, then we need to figure out what their issues are and address them. But this is a true but-for type of TIF district. We do not have we don't have a bird in our hand, or anything like that. I mean, this is truly about offering an incentive and nobody gets it unless we have a TIF district.
About readiness.
Yep.
Okay. Thanks, Dan.
Yep.
Thanks, Nicola. I encourage anyone who still has questions about TIF districts, about this to reach out to Nicola, reach out to Clint. They can get a hold of Dan if you have questions, but this is truly a readiness activity. All right, so that's our work session on that. Candace, we don't need to record the next part. If you can turn off the recorder. I mean, I wanted this TIF part recorded in case Lynn wanted to see it, or in case any new council member